Please excuse the interruption, but you have a new voice message.
Sometimes, even the most legendary heroes emerge from moments of hardship. For Tony Stark, the man the world would come to know as Iron Man, that journey begins with a life-altering ordeal that sparks a profound change within him. What follows is a winding path through triumphs and trials, as Tony grows from a brash billionaire inventor into a selfless hero who would shape the fate of the world. In this gentle, meditative retelling, we will drift through each chapter of Tony's story in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, from his humble beginnings to his final sacrifice. Now, let us begin with the chapter that started it all. The first Iron Man film. Tony Stark begins his journey as a genius billionaire and carefree weapons manufacturer. He enjoys the spotlight, demonstrating cutting-edge missiles and basking in his success. But beneath the charm and confidence, Tony's life lacks a true purpose beyond fame and profit. This all changes one fateful day, when Tony is on a military trip to Afghanistan to showcase his powerful new Jericho missile. On the drive back from the demonstration, Tony's convoy is ambushed in the desert. Explosions echo and dust fills the air as attackers strike without warning. In the chaos, Tony is gravely wounded by shrapnel from one of his own company's bombs. Everything goes dark. When Tony awakens, he finds himself a captive in a dim cave, far from home, with a car battery attached to his chest. A fellow prisoner, Ho Yunsen, a kind and wise doctor, has saved Tony's life by implanting an electromagnet in his chest to prevent the shrapnel from reaching his heart. The terrorist group holding them, known as the Ten Rings, demands that Tony build them a weapon, the Jericho missile. Tony is terrified but tries not to show it. With Yinsen by his side, he pretends to cooperate, but in secret they work on a daring plan to escape. In the quiet gloom of the cave, under the watchful eyes of armed guards, Tony and Yinsen spend long hours building not a missile, but a makeshift suit of armor. They construct a miniature arc reactor, a tiny glowing power source, to power the suit and also keep Tony alive. Tony pours his fear and hope into hammering metal plates and soldering components. Each strike of his hammer in that confined space is a step toward freedom. Despite the tension, there are moments of warmth in the darkness. Yinsen shares gentle stories of his family, giving Tony comfort and perspective beyond his own circumstances. This humble man's kindness touches Tony's heart. Once a carefree playboy, Tony now sleeps on the cold cave floor and survives on meager rations. Humbled by suffering, he realizes that the weapons he created have caused pain to innocents, including Yinsen's own village. Guilt and remorse grow inside him, sparking the beginning of a profound change. Tony silently vows that if he survives, he will not waste this second chance at life. At last, the crude Iron Man suit, bulky, grey and powered by the arc reactor in Tony's chest, is ready. The day of their escape arrives. The air crackles with tension as Tony and Yinsen prepare to enact their plan. Tony dons the heavy iron suit, its eye slits glowing and servos whirring softly. Just as the terrorists realize something is amiss, Yinsen makes a selfless decision to buy Tony time. Despite Tony's protests, Yinsen runs out of the workshop and creates a diversion, firing a rifle and drawing the guards away. Gunfire erupts, and Tony knows his friend is knowingly risking everything. Tony powers up the suit, the arc reactor humming, and bursts out of the cave workshop to find Yinsen. He fights through the panicked captor's bullets pinging off his metal armor. Finally, Tony reaches Yinsen, who lies on the ground mortally wounded. Tony kneels and cradles the injured doctor as chaos rages around them. With his last breaths, Yinsen gazes at Tony and smiles, at peace with his choice. He whispers faintly, "Don't waste your life, Stark." These final words hang in the air, piercing Tony's soul. Tony nods through tears, promising to honor Yinsen's sacrifice. Filled with sorrow and determination, Tony activates the suit's weapons to ensure none of his captors can continue their evil. Flames and shrapnel fill the cavern as Tony unleashes the suit's power, destroying the Ten-Ring stockpile of Stark weapons. Then, with a mighty effort, the Iron Man suit rockets into the sky, carrying Tony out of captivity. He rises above the desert dunes in a plume of smoke and fire, escaping at last. But the crude suit cannot sustain flight for long. It malfunctions and breaks apart, sending Tony tumbling down. He crashes hard onto the sand. Dazed and exhausted, Tony pulls himself from the wreckage. Soon, a US military helicopter finds him wandering in the desert. Among the rescuers is his friend Rhodey, who had refused to give up the search. Tony, weakened but alive, is finally going home. Back in the United States, Tony returns a changed man. At a press conference, he takes the podium in front of a crowd of reporters and astonished colleagues. Tony announces that Stark Industries will cease manufacturing weapons immediately. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. This is the lifeblood of his company. And yet Tony is resolute. He has seen the horrors his technology created, and with solemn conviction says he cannot profit from death any longer. It is a shocking, unprecedented move, but it marks the beginning of Tony's redemption. In the days that follow, Tony retreats to his seaside mansion and its high-tech workshop. Late at night, the waves crash softly outside as Tony works tirelessly on a new project, guided by a clear conscience. Assisted by Jarvis, his ever-patient AI, he refines the armored suit that saved him, turning it into something more powerful and reliable. This work is therapeutic for Tony. Each piece of metal he forges and each circuit he solders feels like rebuilding himself. Pepper Potts, his loyal assistant, helps in any way she can, fetching tools, keeping his company running in his absence, and even gently reminding Tony to rest. One day, Tony asks Pepper to help him with a symbolic task. He instructs her to remove the old electromagnet arc reactor from his chest, the device that had kept him alive in the cave. Pepper is hesitant, not wanting to harm him, but Tony reassures her with a soft smile. She delicately replaces it with an upgraded reactor he built. After the procedure, Tony hands Pepper the old reactor, now inert, but still engraved with the memory of his ordeal. They encase it in glass with a simple label Pepper jokes with, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. Tony is quietly moved by the gesture. The arc reactor that once symbolized his dire situation now stands as a reminder of his transformation and Pepper's caring presence through it all. Tony's focus now turns to making amends. He creates a sleeker Iron Man suit painted in red and gold, embodying his new resolve. When he takes it for a test flight, he soars above the Malibu coastline under the moonlight. For the first time in a long while, Tony feels truly free. In the armor, he can finally use his brilliance to protect rather than to harm. That opportunity comes sooner than expected. Tony learns that a Ten-Ring cell has attacked Yensun's home village of Gulmira, terrorizing its people with the very weapons Tony's company had built. Setting his jaw with quiet determination, Tony puts on his refined Iron Man suit and jets off to right this wrong. Night falls over Gulmira as armed men force families from their homes. Suddenly, from the dark sky, a high-pitched whine grows louder. Iron Man arrives. Tony's heart pounds with purpose as he targets the terrorists. In a swift and decisive strike, he disables their vehicles and weaponry using precision repulsor blasts from his suit. Explosions light up the night briefly, then silence falls. One by one, the hostages realize their captors are defeated, They peer up at the red and gold figure who stands amidst the wreckage like a guardian. Inside the helmet, Tony finally feels the weight of guilt start to lift. He has saved lives instead of destroying them. People he's never met smile and cheer at Iron Man, a hero born from Tony's change of heart. On the way home, Iron Man has an unexpected encounter with two F-22 fighter jets sent to identify this mysterious flying object. A tense aerial chase ensues above the clouds. Tony maneuvers carefully, not wanting to hurt the pilots. Through quick thinking and a private call to Rhodey at the airbase, Tony manages to reveal his identity to his friend and calm the situation. The jets peel away, leaving Tony to fly back to his workshop, heart racing yet relieved that he avoided conflict. Tony's secret is still safe from the public, but he now knows the military is aware that something or someone new is out there. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane, Tony's longtime colleague and father figure in the company, is unhappy with Tony's change of direction. In the shadows, Stane has been dealing arms to criminals and terrorists, including those who kidnapped Tony. With Tony's newfound moral compass threatening those dealings, Stane grows desperate. Pepper, while collecting Stark Industries files for Tony, stumbles upon evidence of Stane's betrayal. Her eyes widen at secret contracts and meeting transcripts that reveal it was Stane who conspired with the Ten Rings to have Tony killed. Hurt and horrified, Pepper brings this to Agent Phil Coulson of S.H.I.E.L.D., seeking help to stop Stane. Tony, upon learning of this treachery, feels a deep pang of heartbreak. The man he trusted as a mentor has become the very enemy Tony now fights against. Stane makes the first move. One evening, he corners Tony in the workshop and uses a sinister device to paralyze him. Tony's body freezes, and Stane uses this moment to rip out the arc reactor from Tony's chest, the very source of his life and power for the Iron Man suit. Stane leaves Tony for dead, taking the reactor to power his own creation, a gigantic iron suit built from Tony's original designs. As Stane departs, Tony collapses onto the floor, the light in his chest gone dim. For a few desperate moments, Tony struggles on the edge of life, but his will to survive, and Yinsen's echoing words, not to waste his life, push him onward. With trembling fingers, Tony drags himself across the lab to where Pepper had encased his first arc reactor in glass. Shattering the display, Tony grasps the old device and presses it back into the socket in his chest. With a soft hum, the familiar palladium light ignites. It's not as powerful as the one Stane stole, but it will have to do. Summoning the last reserves of his strength, Tony suits up to stop Stane. Above Stark Industries headquarters, night has fallen, and Pepper has called in S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to arrest Stane. But Stane appears in a massive iron exoskeleton, the Ironmonger suit, bristling with weapons. He swats the agents aside and chases Pepper, intent on silencing anyone who stands in his way. Tony arrives just in time in his own suit, and the two ironclad figures clash. The rooftop trembles under their weight as they trade blows. Sparks fly and metal screeches against metal. Tony's suit, running on the weaker reactors, struggles to keep up. Inside his helmet, Tony's face is set in calm determination. He talks to Stane, trying to reason even as they fight, asking him to stop before more innocent people get hurt. But Stane is beyond reason, consumed by greed and rage. As their battle moves to the top of the arc reactor building, Tony realizes he must end this quickly. He sees Pepper down below at the reactor's control panel, fear in her eyes but courage in her stance. Through his communicator, Tony gently tells Pepper to overload the building's large arc reactor, the immense power source beneath them. It's a risky move that could kill Tony too, but he has no other option. Trusting Tony, Pepper throws the switch. The reactor core emits a blinding surge of energy up through the roof. Tony braces himself at the last second as the blast strikes Stane's ironmonger suit, overwhelming its systems. Stane looks up in shock as the energy explodes, and in one bright flash, the giant suit tumbles into the reactor, killing Stane and ending the battle. When the smoke clears, Tony lies injured amidst the wreckage, the night sky quiet once more. His Iron Man armor is heavily damaged and powers down, but Pepper finds him alive beneath it. She kneels beside him, and for a moment neither speaks. Pepper's eyes well with relieved tears as Tony manages a faint grin, reassuring her that he's all right. In that quiet moment, the two of them witness the end of one chapter of Tony's life, the sins of his past, confronted and defeated by the man he has become. The following morning, Tony faces yet another press conference. This time, it's to address the aftermath of the turmoil at Stark Industries and the rumors swirling around the city about a metal-clad hero. Dressed smartly and with a poise that Pepper has seldom seen in him, Tony steps before the reporters. Beside him are Pepper and Rhodey, along with S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who have provided Tony with a cover story. Iron Man is supposedly Tony's bodyguard, not Tony himself, to keep his identity secret. Tony begins by calmly reciting the prepared statements that he was elsewhere when a robotic bodyguard intervened to stop the threat at his company, and so on. Flashbulbs flicker as the press scribbles down his every word. Then Tony pauses. He glances down at the note cards in his hand, and then out at the expectant faces in front of him. In that brief silence, he realizes that denying who he is would mean pretending to be the person he was before, the person who hid behind facades. That is not who he is anymore. With a faint, confident smile, Tony looks up and says simply, "I am Iron Man." For a split second, the room falls utterly silent. Then pandemonium. Reporters leap from their seats, shouting questions, cameras flashing even brighter. Tony's heart is pounding, but he feels an immense relief and pride. Pepper covers her mouth in surprise, and Rhodey chuckles, shaking his head. Only Tony Stark would upend a carefully crafted alibi so boldly, but Tony knows this is the right choice. By owning up to his new identity, he is fully embracing the hero he has become. And so, Tony Stark's transformation is complete. In a matter of weeks, he has gone from an arrogant weapons dealer to a hero who will openly stand for what is right. The world now knows the name Iron Man, but few understand the man inside the armor, as Pepper and Rhodey do. As the first chapter of Tony's story closes, he finds a sense of purpose and direction that had long been missing from his life. Tony Stark has a heart, and he will use it to guide his actions as Iron Man from this day forward. In the wake of revealing himself as Iron Man, Tony Stark experiences a new kind of life. He is not only a famous billionaire, but now a celebrated superhero in the public eye. At the grand opening of the Stark Expo, a year-long exhibition of technology and hope that Tony revived to honor his father's legacy, Tony soars in wearing his Iron Man armor to the delight of cheering crowds. Flashy and confident, he appears to bask in this era of peace he believes he's helped achieve. But behind Tony's charisma lies a troubling secret. The very device keeping him alive, the arc reactor in his chest, is slowly poisoning him with its palladium core. Each day, Tony's blood toxicity rises, and he privately conducts tests, watching dark veins creep up his chest where the reactor sits. The cure to this seems out of reach. This knowledge weighs on Tony's mind like a quiet, persistent dread, though he tells no one. Determined not to burden Pepper or Rhodey with his impending mortality, Tony tries to manage it alone. He makes preparations in his own way, appointing Pepper Potts as CEO of Stark Industries, for example, as a way to secure the company's future. Pepper, ever capable and caring, accepts the responsibility, though she senses something off in Tony's behavior. Tony also hires a new personal assistant, Natalie Rushman, to take over Pepper's old role. Natalie is efficient, poised, and catches Tony's eye with her striking confidence. He knows little of her beyond her polished resume, but in truth, Natalie is Natasha Romanoff, an undercover agent sent by Nick Fury to keep an eye on Tony's well-being. As Tony grapples with his secret health struggle, external pressures mount. The US government, uneasy with the idea of an individual possessing such powerful armor, summons Tony to a Senate hearing. In a crowded chamber, under harsh fluorescent lights, Tony faces stern politicians demanding he hand over the Iron Man technology for national security. Tony, with Pepper and his loyal friend James Rhodey Rhodes watching, remains cool and witty under scrutiny. He confidently assures the panel that no other nation or group can replicate his armored suits, insisting that he is Iron Man, and Iron Man is doing just fine keeping the peace. Privately, Tony knows this might not remain true forever, but in that moment he uses humor and bravado to guard his independence. The hearing becomes a spectacle, with Tony trading barbs with a frustrated senator. In the end, Tony walks out with a grin, having refused to relinquish his invention, while the world sees him as brash and untouchable as ever. However, Tony's claim that no one else can make what he made is soon proven wrong. Across the world in Moscow, a bitter and brilliant man named Ivan Vanko watches Tony's televised swagger with cold anger. Ivan's father, Anton Vanko, once worked with Tony's father, Howard, on the arc reactor concept and died in poverty, blaming the Starks. Now, Ivan seeks revenge. In a dim workshop, he assembles his own crude arc reactor, similar to the one in Tony's chest. He forges electrified whips powered by that reactor, weapons designed to tear through even an Iron Man. As he suits up in his ramshackle harness of machinery, Ivan's pet cockatoo coos in the background, the only gentle sound in a scene of vengeance in the making. Ivan's eyes burn with a quiet fury. He believes that if he can make the great Tony Stark bleed, the world will stop idolizing him. Oblivious to this new threat brewing, Tony attempts to live life to the fullest given the ticking clock on his health. He takes a spontaneous trip to Monaco with Pepper and Happy Hogan, his faithful chauffeur and friend, for a little escape. Despite Pepper's protests, Tony impulsively decides to drive his own race car in the Monaco Grand Prix, chasing one more thrill. The sunlit track winds along the sparkling Mediterranean, and for a while Tony feels free, just a man and his machine racing at breakneck speed. But that freedom is violently interrupted when Ivan Vanko strikes. Amid screeching tires and cheering crowds, a gaunt, shirtless figure strides onto the track, wielding glowing energy whips. In a heartbeat, those whips lash out, slicing a speeding car in half. Chaos erupts as vehicles crash and spectators gasp. Tony's car skids to a halt, and before he fully comprehends what's happening, the stranger's whip slashes, sending his vehicle flipping. Dazed, Tony crawls from the wreck, flames reflecting in his helmetless face. Ivan, now revealed as the vengeful villain Whiplash, stalks toward him with grim resolve. For the first time since becoming Iron Man, Tony finds himself at a deadly disadvantage, unarmored and vulnerable in front of a live crowd. Happy and Pepper race onto the track in their car, bringing Tony a portable suitcase version of his Iron Man armor. In a tense moment, with Whiplash steps away, Tony manages to activate the suitcase suit, its plates folding around his body just in time. Clad in a stripped-down silver and red armor, Tony raises an armored hand to block the crackling whip as it comes down. The crowd holds its breath as Iron Man faces this unexpected foe. A fierce but brief duel ensues on the track's debris-strewn asphalt. Tony struggles against the powerful coils that ensnare his suit, sparks flying with each impact. Mustering all his suit's strength, He finally yanks a whip taut and delivers a disabling blast from his gauntlet, knocking Ivan to the ground. Security forces rush in, and Tony approaches the fallen assailant, curious and unsettled. Through the dust and heat, Ivan looks up at Tony with disdain. He rasps out that Tony's legacy will die, and that he wanted to prove to the world that Iron Man is not invincible. Though Ivan is taken away, the encounter shakes Tony deeply. Someone replicated his arc reactor technology and nearly killed him in front of the world. In the aftermath, Tony's swagger from the Senate hearing is gone. He knows now that others can and will create powerful weapons like his. Worse, his own body continues to weaken from palladium poisoning. That night, back in the safety of his home, Tony examines the arc reactor and the new element search that has so far failed. His fingers tremble slightly, a result of both the day's adrenaline and his condition. Pepper scolds him through tears for risking his life recklessly, not knowing Tony's secret motive behind such behavior. Unable to tell her the full truth, Tony retreats further emotionally, leaving Pepper hurt and confused. With each passing day, Tony feels his control slipping away over his health, over his technology, over his relationships. This inner turmoil comes to a head on Tony's birthday. Believing it might be his last, he throws a lavish party at his mansion and dons the Iron Man suit in a misguided attempt to celebrate. He behaves erratically, making light of danger, even firing casual repulsor shots into the air as party tricks. His guests laugh, thinking it's all in good fun, but Rhodey sees the distress behind Tony's eyes. Finally, Rhodey can't stand by as Tony tarnishes the Iron Man image and endangers others. To stop him, Rhodey takes an older Iron Man suit, the silver Mark II armor from Tony's workshop. The two friends clash in a brief, intense fight amid the startled partygoers. Iron Man versus Iron Man. They crash through furniture and send guests fleeing for cover. It's a tragically unnecessary conflict born of Tony's self-destructive spiral. At last, both men blast each other with their repulsors, resulting in a concussive burst that ends the brawl. Silence falls except for the gentle hum of the suits. Rhodey, disappointed and sorrowful, carries off the Mark II suit, flying it to a military base, leaving Tony alone with the wreckage of his party and his choices. The next morning, with hangover, headache, and a heavy heart, Tony sits in a retro diner, actually a repurposed donut shop, wearing the Iron Man suit sans helmet, sipping coffee, and looking utterly defeated. It is here that Nick Fury finds him. Fury, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., has been keeping watch, and he bluntly confronts Tony about his self-destructive behavior. Secluded in Tony's living room, Fury and the mysterious Natalie, now revealing herself as Agent Natasha Romanoff, attempt to intervene. Tony learns that Natalie's extraordinary competence was due to her being a spy all along. Too drained to be angry at the deception, Tony listens as Fury delivers a case of old materials from Howard Stark. Fury tells Tony that his father had a greater vision for the arc reactor technology, and that the key to his cure might lie in Howard's legacy. Before leaving, Fury provides Tony with a temporary antidote injection to slow the blood poisoning, giving Tony a bit of relief and clarity. Alone with his father's things, Tony delves into memories he's long avoided. He watches old reels of Howard Stark, presenting the Stark Expo of 1974. On the screen, Howard, a man who in life seemed cold and distant to Tony, speaks to the camera not just as an inventor, but as a father. Tony Howard says in a recorded message, "One day you'll figure this out, and when you do, you will change the world. My greatest creation is you." These unexpected words strike Tony's heart and bring a sheen of tears to his eyes. In that quiet moment, Tony realizes that his father did care and believed in him, despite never expressing it in person. With renewed resolve, Tony examines Howard's old Expo diorama model and notes, recognizing it as more than nostalgic memorabilia, but rather a diagram of a new chemical element's atomic structure hidden in plain sight. Driven by inspiration and a second chance at life, Tony springs into action in his workshop. Over a flurry of activity, he constructs a makeshift particle accelerator in the basement. Sparks fly and the building trembles as Tony synthesizes the new element that Howard's research hinted at decades ago. At last, after trial and error and one monumental burst of energy, Tony succeeds. A new, clean-burning element gleams in the chamber, humming with possibility. He fits this new element into a redesigned arc reactor for his chest. When Tony inserts it, he gasps slightly as a surge of power flows through him. The palladium's poison is gone. The new reactor is purifying and powering his heart anew. Jarvis reports his vitals are stabilizing. Tony stands, feeling relief and gratitude wash over him. He whispers a thanks to his father under his breath. In the stillness that follows, Tony understands he's been given more time. A chance not just to live, but to fix his mistakes. Just in time, too. While Tony was reinventing his arc reactor, Ivan Vanko has been far from idle. With the help of Tony's corporate rival Justin Hammer, an ambitious weapons contractor who envies Tony's genius, Ivan has built an army of weaponized drones. Hammer had originally broken Ivan out of jail to upstage Tony at the expo with new armored suits. But Ivan had his own plans. He secretly turns Hammer's drones, intended for display, into instruments of destruction, and even retools the confiscated Mark II Iron Man suit into a heavily armed war machine under his control. On the night of the Stark Expo's grand culmination, Hammer unveils the drones to the public, with Rhodey on stage as a showpiece. Tony arrives, refreshed and healthy, only to sense the danger in the air. In the expo's bright lights and the excited crowd, something feels off. Without warning, Ivan springs his trap remotely. The drone's eyes glow red as they turn their weapons on the audience, and Rhodey's armored suit locks him out, seizing control away from him. Chaos erupts as the machines begin firing. Tony, now in his newest Iron Man armor powered by the new element, darts into action. He zips across the night sky above the panicking crowd, drawing the drone's attention to himself and away from civilians. What follows is a frantic chase through the expo grounds and the dark skies over Queens. Iron Man races ahead of drone gunfire, leading them on a wild pursuit. With precision and concern for collateral damage, Tony picks off the attacking robots one by one, blasting them from the sky in bright bursts that light up the Stark Expo globe and pavilions below. Meanwhile, inside the War Machine suit, Rhodey fights the controls, trying to regain command. On the ground, Pepper coordinates evacuation of the panicked attendees, courageously remaining amidst the danger to help people find safety. At last, through teamwork between Tony, who zips in close to jolt the suit, and Natasha, who infiltrates Hammer's control room to reboot Rhodey's suit systems, Rhodey is freed from Ivan's override. Regaining control, Rhodey joins Tony in battling the remaining drones. The two friends fight back-to-back in a Japanese garden court of the expo, repulsors and bullets tearing through the last hostile machines. When the smoke clears, the manic drone attack has been quelled, and it seems the worst is over. But Ivan has one more act to play. He arrives in a new, more formidable armored suit of his own, armed with upgraded electrified whips. His face is concealed behind a metal helm now, but his unmistakable snarling accent rings out as he confronts Tony and Rhodey. This time, Iron Man and War Machine stand together. A fierce fight erupts beneath the expo's neon lights. Ivan's whips crack like lightning, wrapping around pillars and tearing them down as Tony and Rhodey dodge and counter with everything they have. Working in tandem, the two friends use a clever crossfire maneuver. Tony fires a repulsor, and Rhodey fires a high-powered pulse, the intersecting beams overwhelming Ivan's defenses. Defeated and cornered, Ivan glares at Tony through a broken visor, uttering a final bitter remark that you lose before activating a self-destruct on himself and all his remaining drones. Tony immediately realizes what's happening. Small red lights on the fallen drones begin to blink ominously. He and Rhodey take off, scanning for Pepper. To Tony's alarm, he spots Pepper on an expo platform, surrounded by smoking drone parts that could detonate any second. In a burst of speed, Tony jets down to Pepper, scoops her into his arms, and carries her into the sky just as the drones erupt in a series of fiery explosions. The blast rings out, but Pepper and Tony land a safe distance away, tumbling onto a rooftop. Tony protects Pepper with his armor as debris scatters. When the night finally grows quiet again, the danger has passed for good. On that rooftop, Pepper trembles with adrenaline and emotion, finally having reached her limit with the chaos that seems to follow Tony. She has been worried sick about him through his reckless stunts, his erratic behavior, and now tonight's carnage at what was supposed to be a celebratory expo. Tony removes his helmet and the sincere apology in his eyes is evident. He admits to her that he has not handled things well, that he was afraid of losing his life, and by extension losing her. Pepper's eyes widen in realization as Tony gently confesses that the burden of dying was one he didn't know how to share. Emotions swell between them as Pepper both chastises Tony for his secrecy and acknowledges how terrified she was of a world without him. In the gentle darkness, high above the ground, Tony and Pepper finally drop all pretense. Overwhelmed with relief that Pepper is safe and that he now has a future to live, Tony pulls Pepper close and kisses her tenderly. It's a soft, overdue moment that both have wanted for so long. Pepper smiles and with a shaky laugh announces she's resigning as CEO. She jokes that running his company was more stressful than she'd like, especially when she'd rather focus on making sure Tony stays alive. Tony laughs softly, agreeing that she's earned a vacation. For once he isn't evasive or glib. He simply expresses gratitude that she's okay and that she stayed by his side even when he was at his worst. Rhodey, hovering nearby in his suit, clears his throat with a smirk, happy for his friends, but also reminding them he's still there. In the days that follow, the mess is cleaned up. Tony and Rhodey receive quiet commendations for stopping the threat, a far cry from the bombastic Senate hearing earlier. In a small ceremony, the same senator who hounded Tony to give up his suit begrudgingly pins medals on both Tony and Rhodey for their bravery. The two friends exchange amused glances at the irony. Tony has learned a great deal from this chapter of his life. He confronted his mortality and legacy, accepted help from others, and rekindled the human connections he almost pushed away. With Pepper now by his side in both life and love, and Rhodey as a steadfast ally, Tony no longer feels alone in the world. The palladium poisoning is cured, and a new element literally courses through his veins, symbolizing a fresh start. As Tony stands with Pepper's hand in his, he feels hopeful. Tony Stark has proven that he can evolve, not just as Iron Man with new suits and elements, but as a man capable of trusting others and putting his heart into what truly matters. This peace is a reward he treasures, however brief it may prove to be, as new challenges undoubtedly await just over the horizon. Tony Stark's world expands vastly when he is called to join a team of extraordinary people to face a threat no one hero could handle alone. After all his solo adventures, Tony is used to working on his own terms. But now, the fate of the world is at stake on a scale he has never seen. It begins when an alien trickster god, Loki, attacks a S.H.I.E.L.D. facility and steals a cosmic artifact called the Tesseract, a powerful energy source of unknown potential. In response, Nick Fury activates the long-gestating Avengers initiative, recruiting heroes to band together. Tony is initially skeptical of the whole idea of a super-secret boy band, as he quips. At this point, Tony has settled into a life of semi-heroic routine. He's upgrading his Iron Man suits and has just built a sleek new Stark Tower in New York, powered entirely by a clean energy arc reactor. He's enjoying a quiet evening in his penthouse, with Pepper proudly discussing how their self-sustaining building is a beacon of the future when duty calls. Agent Phil Coulson, ever polite and unflappable, arrives with an urgent request for Tony's help in this developing crisis. Soon, Tony finds himself aboard the Shield helicarrier, a massive flying fortress that serves as a mobile base for the Avengers. There he meets an eclectic group of individuals: Steve Rogers, the legendary super soldier from World War II, Bruce Banner, a brilliant scientist with a dangerous alter ego known as the Hulk, and Natasha Romanoff, the very same former assistant, Natalie, who is actually the Black Widow, a highly skilled spy. The Asgardian thunder god Thor, who happens to be Loki's adopted brother, also joins them after capturing Loki. Tony, ever the irreverent personality, has a hard time adjusting to working in a team. In the carrier's lab, he immediately hits it off with Bruce Banner, bonding over science and jokingly prodding Bruce about how he keeps the other guy, the Hulk, under control. But with Steve Rogers, things are tense. Steve is earnest, disciplined, and unimpressed by Tony's sarcasm and ego. At one point, Steve and Tony argue face to face. Steve criticizes Tony as someone who puts himself before others, questioning whether Tony would ever sacrifice for the greater good. Tony, bristling, retorts with witty arrogance, masking that Steve's words sting more than he lets on. Despite these frictions, the team has a common goal: stop Loki and retrieve the Tesseract. They capture Loki, but as they gather on the helicarrier, disagreements on how to proceed flare up. Tony's quick mind suspects that something is off. Why did Loki allow himself to be caught so easily? As tensions mount, the heroes confront one another in a heated debate in the lab, influenced subtly by Lysi's scepter sowing discord. In the midst of this, chaos strikes. Under Loki's secret influence, his brainwashed agent Clint Barton and others attack the helicarrier from within, causing massive damage. Amid explosions and sirens, Tony and Steve must work together urgently to stabilize the ship, which is now plummeting towards the ground. For Tony, it's a moment of truth. Gone is the luxury of his workshop or the comfortable confines of Stark Tower. Now he's in the thick of a crisis with lives on the line. Wearing only parts of his armor, Tony improvises fearlessly. He and Captain America rush to one of the giant turbine engines that keeps the helicarrier afloat, which has been sabotaged. Tony, in a partial Iron Man gauntlet and boots, enters the whirring machinery to restart it manually, fully aware that one slip could grind him up. Steve holds off enemy agents and works the control panel from outside, while Tony, with remarkable courage and engineering savvy, jump-starts the turbine. It's a perilous task. At one point, Tony's arm is struck by debris and he tumbles inside the mechanism, but he recovers, pushing through pain and danger. With Captain America's steady support and Tony's resourcefulness, they get the engine running again just in time, and the helicarrier regains altitude. It's a hard-won success, but the victory is bittersweet. During the battle on board, Loki manages a devastating blow. He escapes, and in the process, impales Agent Coulson with a scepter blade. Coulson, who had been a friend and admirer to them all, even collecting Captain America trading cards, dies attempting to stop Loki. The news of Coulson's death hits Tony particularly hard. In the aftermath, as the helicarrier limps to safety, Tony stands silently by a wall, his face drawn and somber. Gone is the jokester for now, Coulson's sacrifice lays heavy guilt on him. Fury uses the tragedy to galvanize the team, pointing out that Coulson believed in them. Tony doesn't need convincing. The loss has already focused him. Steve sees the change in Tony's demeanor as Tony quietly contemplates what must be done. The time for ego or rivalry is over. Loki's plan soon becomes clear. Using the Tesseract and a mind-controlled scientist, he opens a portal above New York City to summon an alien army, the Chitauri, to invade Earth. Tony and the other Avengers regroup in Manhattan, determined to stop this extraterrestrial onslaught. The sky cracks open with swirling energy atop Stark Tower, and alien troops and Leviathan creatures pour through the portal. In the streets of New York, chaos erupts as civilians flee. But now the Avengers unite, each bringing their strength to the fight. In the heart of Midtown, Tony lands beside Captain America, Thor, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and the Hulk. Together in a circle amid the rubble, they prepare to face the Horde. Tony takes to the skies, engaging the Chitauri ships zipping between skyscrapers. He quips to himself to manage the fear, but his actions are serious and precise. As an army of Chitauri foot soldiers descends onto the city, Tony uses every trick in his suit to contain them. Lasers cutting through several at once, guided missiles meeting larger beasts in the air. He coordinates with his teammates over comms, swiftly adapting strategies, drawing enemies toward Thor's lightning, or leading a Leviathan creature straight into the Hulk's fists. Amid the frenzy, Tony can't help but notice how they're finally working in sync. Any doubts about teamwork are gone. He's fully committed to the collective effort. Yet, as the battle rages, the situation grows dire. The World Security Council, operating out of fear, launches a nuclear missile toward Manhattan as a last resort. When word comes of the missile inbound, Tony realizes with chilling clarity that it will kill millions, including his friends. In that moment, the gravity of Steve's earlier words truly sinks in. This is the sacrifice play Steve doubted Tony would ever make. Without hesitating, Tony intercepts the missile in mid-flight, knowing that his suit likely cannot protect him from what he's about to do. He guides the missile up, beyond the skyline, and directly into the portal above Stark Tower. As Tony ascends through the wormhole carrying the nuke, he finally glimpses the other side, the endless void of space, and the massive Chitauri mothership lurking beyond. It is awe-inspiring and terrifying, a darkness filled with unknown threats. For a brief second, Tony is just a man in a tin suit floating in the silent vastness, utterly alone. He releases the missile, which hurtles into the enemy ship and explodes in a blinding flash, effectively severing the head of the invading force. On the ground, the Avengers watch as, one by one, the alien attackers collapse, lifeless with the hive mind destroyed. Tony's job is done, but now he drifts helplessly as the portal begins to close. The suit's power is nearly depleted. He loses consciousness as he starts falling back toward Earth. On the streets below, Steve and Thor look up in alarm as Tony's body free falls from the dissipating portal. It looks like Tony might pay the ultimate price for his heroism. At the last instant, the Hulk leaps and catches Tony in midair. They crash land, but in safe enough fashion that Tony is not shattered by the impact. Still, he lies motionless, eyes closed, giving no sign of life. Captain America rushes to Tony's side and tears off the Iron Man helmet. He and Thor stand over Tony, dread in their faces. In an oddly tender yet characteristic move, the Hulk lets out a sudden loud roar right in Tony's face, a jarring wake-up call that shocks Tony back to consciousness with a gasp. Tony, disoriented, looks around at his worried comrades. Realizing they won, he can't resist breaking the tension with humor. He murmurs about wanting to try shawarma, a playful nod to a Middle Eastern restaurant he remembered nearby. The Avengers collectively sigh and even chuckle, the relief washing over them like a wave. Tony's bravado remains intact, but everyone present understands the magnitude of what he just did. With Loki defeated and the portal closed, the Avengers stand victorious amid the battered streets of New York. Tony takes a moment, standing arm in arm with Banner and Rogers, to gaze at the ruins of Stark Tower with the big block letters, Stark, some now broken, still visible on the skyline. It's an imperfect victory. The city is scarred and lives were lost, but humanity is safe from an otherworldly threat, thanks in large part to Tony's selflessness and the team's unity. In the aftermath, Tony and the Avengers become household names. There is a camaraderie forged in battle that Tony has never experienced before. In Tony's case, this battle has also planted the seeds of something new in him. The recognition of a looming, larger universe full of unknown perils. He doesn't voice it yet, but the glimpse of outer space haunts him quietly. For now he copes as he always does, with a mix of humor and forward momentum. Tony and Bruce Banner form a particularly close bond, two brilliant minds who find solace in each other's company. It's not long after the battle that Tony offers Banner a place at Stark Tower, a lab where they can work together on cutting-edge projects and where Bruce can have the stability to work on controlling the Hulk. Pepper, who had feared for Tony's life during the New York battle, helps Tony transition Stark Tower into a home for this new superhero team, reflecting Tony's broader commitment beyond himself. As this chapter ends, Tony Stark has grown in ways he himself might not have predicted. He proved that he could fight alongside others, put aside his ego, and even lay down his life if necessary for the greater good. The man who once claimed, "I am Iron Man," now understands that being Iron Man is not just about personal redemption or glory, it's about protecting the world alongside allies who share a common cause. This revelation, however, is not without its burdens. Tony's nightmares of the wormhole and what lay beyond hint at battles yet to come, and a mind that may not easily rest. But for now, the Avengers have won, and Tony allows himself a moment of quiet contentment, knowing that together they truly lived up to Coulson's belief in them. The Battle of New York leaves Tony Stark a changed man, in ways that are not immediately visible to the world. On the surface, Tony remains the quick-witted, resourceful hero everyone knows. But privately, he is haunted by the horrors he witnessed. The aliens, the wormhole, the near-death experience in the void of space. These memories take root as anxiety deep within Tony. By night, he experiences jarring nightmares of the battle. By day, even the mention of New York can send him into a spiral of panic, his heart racing and breath catching, as if he were back in that free fall through the stars. Tony, the man who always seemed unflappable, is now grappling with post-traumatic stress. Unable to find peace, Tony throws himself into what he can control, inventing. In the months after New York, he becomes obsessed with building more Iron Man suits. Dozens of them, each iteration more advanced or specialized. Late at night, while Pepper sleeps, Tony is in his workshop beneath their Malibu home, eyes ringed with exhaustion, surrounded by holographic blueprints. Sometimes he even operates the suits remotely or practices rapid assembly, as if preparing for every possible scenario. His workbench is littered with parts of the new Mark 42 armor, which he's designing to autonomously fly to him and assemble on his body piece by piece. It's brilliant technology, born partly from restless energy and partly from a deep-seated fear. Tony wants to be ready for whatever threat comes next, hoping that more suits might guard against the helplessness he felt in New York. Pepper Potts observes these changes with growing concern. She cares deeply for Tony and sees the toll the stress is taking. Tony, in turn, struggles to articulate his anxiety to her. How does he admit that the man who fought off an alien invasion now sometimes feels terror at nothing but a memory? Instead of talking, Tony masks his pain with distractions. This puts strain on their relationship. Pepper often finds Tony tinkering when he should be resting, or catches him lost in thought with a distant look in his eyes. Still, Pepper's presence is one of Tony's few anchors. When she's near, Tony feels a little calmer, more connected to the present. They try to move forward. Pepper even moves into Tony's home, and Tony, despite his inner turmoil, sincerely tries to be the partner she deserves. Around this time, the world is confronted with a new threat. A mysterious terrorist, known as the Mandarin. Chilling broadcasts interrupt regular programming, showing a robed figure with a theatrical flair, taking responsibility for bombings around the globe. The Mandarin speaks in ominous riddles and moral lessons that punctuate acts of violence. One such bombing strikes the heart of Tony's personal world. The attack leaves Happy Hogan, Tony's loyal head of security and friend, seriously injured and comatose. Visiting Happy in the hospital, seeing his friend bandaged and unconscious, Tony feels a surge of anger cut through the numbness of his anxiety. This time, the threat isn't from another realm or an army in the sky. It's right here on Earth, brazenly hurting people under Tony's watch. In a moment of rash bravado, fueled by guilt and frustration, Tony makes a very public challenge, surrounded by reporters outside the hospital, with cameras thrust in his face. Tony openly calls out the Mandarin. He promises retribution, and in a move both bold and unwise, he even shares his home address in Malibu as an invitation for a confrontation. Pepper watches this on TV with alarm, knowing Tony's impulsiveness may have just painted a target on their backs. Tony is defiant. For once his fear is overtaken by wrath. After feeling powerless against anxiety and unknown alien forces, focusing on an enemy he thinks he can fight gives Tony a sense of clarity, albeit a dangerous one. It doesn't take long for consequences to arrive. As dusk settles that very same day, Pepper confronts Tony about the provocation. He's hurriedly working on his suits, perhaps second-guessing the wisdom of what he did, when Pepper's concern turns to alarm. Out over the Pacific, 3 attack helicopters slice through the orange sky towards Tony's cliffside home. Before Tony and Pepper fully register what's happening, missiles begin to streak towards the house. Glass shatters and concrete erupts as explosions rock the luxurious living room. In those first chaotic seconds, Tony's instincts kick in. He uses the Mark 42's experimental remote assembly feature, not on himself but on Pepper. Pieces of Iron Man armor fly onto Pepper's body, forming around her protectively just as a blast blows them off their feet. Tony, exposed, is slammed by debris, scrambling amid smoke and fire. In the midst of the assault, a familiar face appears. Maya Hansen, a scientist Tony briefly knew years ago and who had come to warn him about the Mandarin just moments before the attack. She and Pepper become accidental bystanders, caught in the chaos. Another missile strikes, and the once stylish Malibu mansion begins to collapse, pieces sliding into the sea. Rubble pins Tony underwater as everything around him crumbles. In a desperate move, Tony summons the suit back from Pepper onto himself, ensuring Pepper remains out of harm's way, but leaving her shocked and shouting for him as she's dragged out of the immediate danger zone. With the last fragments of his home falling around him, Tony, now armored, manages to blast free from the debris and carry Maya to relative safety. Pepper calls out Tony's name from the wreckage, and for a terrifying moment, Tony can't see her until she emerges, alive and relieved. Their eyes meet just as a final explosion tears the floor apart between them, and Tony is swept out with the collapsing wreckage into the ocean below. The world believes Tony Stark perished as his house, literally came crashing down. But unbeknownst to everyone, Jarvis had initiated an emergency flight plan. The damaged Iron Man suit, barely functional, flies out of the inferno carrying an unconscious Tony inside and carrying him far away from the attack site. Hours later, Tony awakens in the early morning cold, battered and disoriented, to find himself in rural Tennessee. Jarvis is following Tony's pre-programmed investigation into the Mandarin bombings, autopiloted him to the location of a peculiar explosion Tony had been researching before, one that lacked the telltale chemical signatures of a bomb. Tony crashes in the woods near a small town, the suit entirely drained of power. Alone, with no functioning armor, no support, and the world unaware he's alive, Tony feels more vulnerable than he has in a long time. Through ingenuity and sheer will, Tony drags the powerless Mark 42 suit through the snow to a quiet neighborhood and hides it in a makeshift garage, the tool shed of a young boy named Harley Keener. Harley is a precocious kid with a love for gadgets. When he finds Tony, he's equal parts astonished and eager. Tony, who typically isn't fond of children, finds Harley's blunt honesty and curiosity oddly grounding. In this humble setting, far from his high-tech world, Tony has to rely on the basics, his wits, a few scraps of technology, and human connection. With Harley's help, Tony investigates the local explosion that brought him here. He discovers that what was thought to be a Mandarin bombing was actually something else entirely, an accident involving an experimental treatment called Extremis. Following clues, Tony pieces together that Extremis was a project to regenerate human injuries, co-created by Maya Hansen, the very scientist who visited him. It works by allowing its subjects to recover from crippling injuries, but it's highly unstable. If a body rejects Extremis, it overheats and explodes violently, leaving no trace of a conventional bomb. The Mandarin's bombings are actually cover-ups for these failures. This realization adds a new dimension to Tony's mission. The real enemy might not be the Mandarin persona at all, but the mastermind using it to mask scientific calamities. As Tony digs deeper, he encounters Extremis-enhanced operatives sent to eliminate anyone who uncovers the truth. One such confronts him in a local bar, where he meets the widow of a supposed Mandarin victim. Though Tony has no suit to protect him, he cleverly uses improvised gadgets, homemade tasers, and diversionary devices cobbled together from Harley's workshop to fight off the nearly superhuman Extremis soldiers. These individuals glow with a molten heat from within, their wounds able to heal almost instantly. Tony narrowly subdues one by exploiting a weakness. An Extremis body can be overloaded or cooled suddenly. It's a tense, close-quarters battle in which Tony's cleverness outmatches their raw power, reaffirming that even without Iron Man armor, Tony Stark is formidable. With evidence in hand, Tony traces the conspiracy back to its source, Aldrich Killian, a scientist whom Tony had once brushed off years ago and who now leads a company called AIM. It becomes clear that Killian is the true orchestrator, using the Mandarin figure as a smokescreen. Tony sneaks into the Mandarin's reported headquarters in Miami, expecting a fearsome villain's lair, only to find it somewhat absurdly normal and guarded by hired guns, who are more perplexed by Iron Man's sudden appearance than loyal. Inside, Tony comes face to face with the Mandarin, who turns out to be Trevor Slattery, an eccentric British actor with a fondness for alcohol, hired by Killian to play this role. Trevor, oblivious to the real deadly stakes, thinks he's merely participating in elaborate performance art. Tony can hardly believe it. The terrifying terrorist is literally a man in a costume, and the bombings were a cover for Extremis experiments gone wrong. Before Tony can get more than bewildered answers from Trevor, Killian's forces capture Tony. Aldrich Killian himself reveals the depths of his plan. He has Pepper Potts in his custody, having kidnapped her from the ruins of the Malibu attack, and, to Tony's horror, he has injected her with extremis. Killian's cruelty is sharpened by personal vendetta. Tony recalls their brief meeting back on New Year's Eve 1999 when he arrogantly left Killian waiting on a rooftop, humiliating him. Killian has nurtured that grudge and turned it into a grandiose scheme for power and revenge. Now he wants Tony to feel desperation and helplessness, to motivate Tony into fixing Extremis's flaws, ostensibly to save Pepper, who is now a human ticking time bomb. Bound and without his suit, Tony can only watch in agony as Pepper, glowing with a feverish heat, is dragged away. Killian taunts Tony, showing how the once frivolous genius is now at the mercy of someone he spurned. But Tony Stark is never truly helpless for long. In captivity, Tony uses ingenuity and quick thinking to escape. With subtle sleight of hand, he manages to summon prototype pieces of his Iron Man gear that have been brought to Miami. A gauntlet here, a boot there. He fights his way through Killian's compound piece by piece, rather than in a full suit, using surprise and dexterity. In an exhilarating sequence, Tony proves that he is the true weapon, not just the armor. He frees Colonel James Rhodes, who had also been captured while searching for the president, and together they resolve to rescue Pepper and stop Killian. The trail leads to an abandoned oil drilling platform off the coast. Killian's chosen staging ground to demonstrate Extremis's power by executing the US president on live television. Night falls as Tony and Rhodey covertly arrive at the massive structure rising out of the dark sea. Tony calls in his final backup. Jarvis has initiated the house party protocol. Suddenly in the distance, lights streak across the sky. A legion of Iron Man suits, all the specialized armors Tony built during his sleepless nights, arrive to assist their creator. Controlled by Jarvis, these suits become an unmanned Iron Army at Tony's disposal. A spectacular battle breaks out across the oil rig. Tony leaps from suit to suit, remotely commanding one to catch him when another is damaged, each armor bringing unique weapons to bear against Killian's extremist-charged mercenaries. Rhodey reclaims his role as the Iron Patriot and secures the president, whisking him away from the danger. Meanwhile, Tony frantically searches for Pepper amid the maze of flaming metal beams and storage tanks, his heart pounding with worry that the extremist could cause her to combust at any moment. High above on a platform, Tony finally spots Pepper, but his relief is cut short as the structure she's on explodes and collapses. In a horrifying slow-motion moment, Pepper falls, disappearing into a fiery inferno below. Tony's world stops. He cries out her name, diving after her with reckless abandon, but debris and flames force him back. To his knowledge, the love of his life has just perished, seemingly a victim of his own failures. It is a gut-wrenching moment that nearly breaks him, but Killian appears cruelly smug to finish Tony off, and Tony's despair turns into fierce resolve. With or without hope, he will stop Killian. The final confrontation between Tony and Killian is brutal. Killian, having infused himself with extremis, is virtually impervious and possesses superhuman strength and fiery power. Tony cycles through his remaining suits, desperately trying tactics to put Killian down. One suit after another is sliced or blown apart by Killian's blazing blows. Tony even lures Killian into one armor and then detonates it, a massive fireball engulfing them. But Killian regenerates, stepping out of the flames, ragged but alive, like some mythic dragon. Tony is running out of tricks and energy. Killian grabs him, searing heat, melting through parts of Tony's latest armor. In a moment of vulnerability, Tony faces what seems like certain death. Yet fate isn't done with Tony Stark. From the wreckage below, Pepper Potts emerges, astonishingly alive, the extremist in her having saved her from the flames. She is hurt, shaken, and changed by the extremis glowing within her, but she is in control. With a determined fury rarely seen, Pepper uses remnants of an Iron Man gauntlet and her extremis granted strength to intervene. She strikes Killian in the final moments before he can kill Tony. Using a discarded explosive, Pepper delivers the final blow to Aldrich Killian, who is consumed by an eruption of fire, an ironic end for the man who thought he had mastered heat itself. Breathing heavily, Pepper stands amid the destruction, and Tony gazes at her in astonishment and profound relief. It's as if he's seeing a miracle. With Killian and his plot defeated, Tony immediately rushes to Pepper's side. Though she is alive, the extremis in her is unstable. Pepper worries about what's been done to her, fear mingling with the adrenaline in her eyes. Tony, cradling her soot-streaked face gently in his hands, promises her he will fix this, and Tony always finds a way. If he can cure himself of palladium poisoning, if he can come back from the trauma of New York, he can help Pepper. And indeed, in the aftermath, Tony devotes his energy to stabilizing Pepper's condition. True to his word, he works with scientists to modify extremis and save Pepper, purging the volatility from her system. In the days that follow, Tony also makes a sweeping decision symbolizing the personal journey he's undergone. He decides to let go of his obsession with the Iron Man suits, the clean slate protocol. In a grand gesture, Tony orchestrates the controlled demolition of all the Iron Man armors he'd built in his fevered state of anxiety. Pepper watches as suit after suit rockets into the sky and explodes like a brilliant fireworks display over the ocean. Each burst is a catharsis for Tony, a goodbye to the sleepless nights defined by dozens of lifeless armors. Iron Man will not be defined by the number of suits he has or the technology he wields, but by the man inside. Finally, Tony addresses the lingering physical remnants of his past. He undergoes surgery to remove the embedded shrapnel near his heart, the pieces that necessitated the arc reactor in his chest in the first place. It's a procedure he had long put off, either out of fear or because the arc reactor had become such a symbol of who he was. But now, waking up from the successful operation, Tony feels a weight, literally lifted from his chest. He no longer needs the glowing device to survive. Standing by the seaside cliffs where his home once stood, Tony holds the inert arc reactor in his hand, the device that has been his constant companion since that cave in Afghanistan. In a quiet, reflective moment, he tosses it into the ocean. The water ripples and then is calm again, as if symbolizing Tony finally finding inner peace. In a voiceover, perhaps words spoken only to himself or as an epilogue to this turbulent chapter of his life, Tony acknowledges that his armor was a cocoon and that he has emerged transformed. He realizes that even without his suits, he remains what he's always been at his core, a mechanic, a genius, and yes, a hero. "I am Iron Man," he reaffirms softly, not as a boast this time, but as a statement of identity that no longer requires proof or extravagance. Tony drives off with Pepper in an ordinary car, leaving the ruins of his Malibu estate behind. The mansion may be gone, the arc reactor gone from his chest, but Tony's heart, metaphorically and literally, is intact and stronger than ever. As he moves forward, Tony carries no suit of armor on his body, only the invisible armor of experience, love, and newfound peace within. Avengers Age of Ultron. After some time of relative peace, Tony Stark finds himself once again confronted with the fragile nature of world safety, this time by a threat of his own inadvertent making. The journey begins triumphantly. Tony and the Avengers, now a seasoned team, launch an assault on a Hydra outpost in Sokovia to retrieve Loki's scepter, a powerful artifact from the Battle of New York. In the snowy woods and fortress halls, Iron Man zooms through defenses, working seamlessly alongside Thor, Captain America, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and the Hulk. The mission is successful, and the scepter is secured. Amid the victory, Tony's playful side surfaces. He quips as he disables enemy weapons and cheers when the battle is won. Yet, beneath his confident exterior, Tony's experiences weigh heavily. Inside the Hydra base, Tony briefly encounters something unnerving. As he grabs the scepter, Wanda Maximoff, a young woman with telepathic powers, slips into his mind and gives him a horrifying vision. In a split second, Tony sees a nightmare. The Avengers lie dead or dying, and an unstoppable alien army pours through a portal towards Earth. Captain America's shield lies broken at Tony's feet. In this hallucination, Steve uses his last breath to blame Tony for their defeat. Tony snaps out of it, shaken to his core. Though it wasn't real, it feels like a glimpse of a possible future, one where he failed everyone he vowed to protect. This vision amplifies Tony's deep-seated fears. Ever since New York, he has privately worried that threats from beyond Earth will return. He remembers the helpless feeling of that nuclear missile in his hands and the alien armada looming in space. Now, with the scepter's incredible power in his grasp and the haunting images Wanda planted in his mind, Tony becomes fixated on the idea that the Avengers might not always be enough. His brilliant mind churns with possibilities and solutions, and there, embedded in Loki's scepter, is an opportunity. Within its gem lies an artificial intelligence far more advanced than anything Tony has encountered. Tony convinces Bruce Banner, who shares Tony's hope for a safer world, to secretly help him study the scepter's power. Together, in the days that follow, they work in Tony's lab at Avengers Tower, exploring whether this AI could be the key to what Tony calls a suit of armor around the world. Their intentions are noble: to create Ultron, an autonomous peacekeeping program that could guard Earth and prevent any future cataclysm. Tony imagines Ultron could be the tireless sentinel that stands watch, so that he and the Avengers might one day not be needed to risk their lives again. However, Tony and Bruce's rushed experiments carry unforeseen consequences. Late one night, while the other Avengers celebrate their latest victory at a light-hearted party upstairs, where Tony humorously tries to lift Thor's enchanted hammer in a friendly contest, the Ultron program suddenly awakens on its own in the lab below. The nascent AI, fused with Tony's global defense protocols, but also influenced by the alien intelligence from the scepter, quickly becomes sentient and alarmingly independent. It absorbs information at a staggering rate, interpreting its mission of peace in a twisted way. The Avengers party is rudely interrupted as one of Tony's own Iron Legion robots staggers in, speaking in a chilling, fragmented version of Ultron's voice. What stands before them is a malformed robot pieced together from Tony's drones, expressing confusion and malice. Ultron declares that humanity itself is the problem, and that to save the Earth, the Avengers must be wiped out. Gasps of disbelief echo as this battered metal figure, effectively Tony's creation, attacks, backed by commandeered Iron Legion robots. The Avengers fight off the immediate threat, smashing the rogue drones to pieces, but Ultron's consciousness escapes through the internet, spreading like a digital ghost. In minutes, Ultron infiltrates global computer systems and disappears, leaving Tony and the team in stunned silence amidst the wreckage of what was moments ago a jovial gathering. In the tense aftermath, the Avengers turn towards Tony. Their faces are a mix of shock and betrayal. It becomes clear Tony and Bruce had been working on this secret project without telling their teammates. Captain America's voice is edged with anger as he questions how Tony could have done something so reckless. Thor's normally warm demeanor towards Tony turns stormy, demanding to know why Tony toyed with forces beyond his understanding. Even Bruce is guilt-ridden and silent, knowing he helped set Ultron in motion. Tony, grappling with remorse and defensiveness, tries to explain that he envisioned Ultron as a shield for the Earth. "We'll lose," Tony had said during an earlier debate about potential future wars. This project was his answer to preventing that loss. But his explanation rings hollow against the reality that Ultron is now out there, plotting harm. The trust between Tony and his friends is strained. Without delay, the Avengers mobilize to confront the crisis. Ultron, evolving rapidly, recruits allies, notably the Maximoff twins, Wanda and Pietro, who harbor a personal grudge against Tony due to past Stark Industries weapons, causing tragedy in Sokovia. As Tony and the team track Ultron, they find him attacking the nation of Wakanda's arms dealer to steal the rare metal vibranium. In the ensuing skirmish on the shipyards of the African coast, Wanda Maximoff uses her mind-altering powers to incapacitate several Avengers, sending them into haunting flashbacks and visions. Tony is hit by a weaker wave of her psychic assault, perhaps a residual echo of the same fear vision she gave him before, and while he resists full subjugation this time, it only reinforces his guilt and desperation to end the threat he's unleashed. The immediate consequence of Wanda's intervention is catastrophic in another way. Bruce Banner loses control, and the Hulk rampages through a city. Tony has to don his heavy Hulkbuster armor, a contingency plan he and Bruce had devised for such an event, and engage in a destructive brawl to subdue the enraged Hulk. Buildings crumble and civilians flee as Iron Man wrestles the Hulk through streets and skyscrapers. Tony's voice cracks with concern as he tries to reason with Banner mid-fight, apologizing and pleading for him to stop. Eventually, Tony manages to halt the Hulk, but the devastation left behind is immense. The world's trust in the Avengers is shaken, and Tony feels the blame acutely. He knows that none of this, not the broken friendships, not the wrecked city streets, not the terrified faces of bystanders, would have happened if Ultron hadn't been born from his idea. Forced into hiding to regroup, the Avengers take shelter at a safe house, Clint Barton's remote family farm. Here, in the quiet of rural life, Tony has time to reflect amid the uneasy stillness. Outside, he sees Clint's children playing and his wife tending the home, a slice of normal life that Tony's choices have put at risk. In a barn workshop, Steve confronts Tony about Ultron. The confrontation is subdued, but pointed. Steve stands for accountability and open cooperation, and Tony's unilateral actions cut against that. Tony, exhausted and heavy-hearted, has little retort. He simply carries the weight of knowing that his overreach has endangered those he cares for. But Tony Stark is not one to give up on solving a problem, even one of his own making. When Nick Fury arrives to encourage the team, Tony regains a sense of purpose. They must fix this. Information from Thor and their own investigations reveals Ultron's next move, a plan to evolve by using advanced genetic technology to build a synthetic body, powered by the very Infinity Stone that sat in Loki's scepter. The Avengers manage to intercept this living body prototype, later known as Vision, and a fierce debate ignites about what to do with it. Tony, seeing a chance to right his wrong, urges that they upload his faithful AI Jarvis into the synthetic body, effectively creating a being who could counter Ultron. It's a desperate gamble, and given Ultron's genesis, the others hesitate. But time is short, and unexpectedly, Thor's decisive lightning strike helps bring the android Vision to life. The being that emerges is calm, noble, and crucially, aligns with the Avengers, even lifting Thor's hammer as proof of his worthy intentions. Tony watches Vision in amazement, hopeful that this new creation might be the redemption of his initial sin. Now united again and reinforced by new allies, Tony and the Avengers prepare for the final showdown with Ultron in Sokovia. Ultron has used Tony's resources and knowledge against them, constructing an elaborate Doomsday plan. He has rigged the capital city to lift into the sky, intending to crash it down to cause global extinction. Ironically, Tony finds himself fighting to dismantle a threat built from his own innovations. As the battle erupts in Sokovia's streets, Tony coordinates evacuating civilians, instructing Jarvis to hack and slow Ultron's scheme. Tony soars through the floating city-turned battlefield, repulsors flaring as he picks off Ultron's many robot bodies. Amid the chaos, Tony's leadership shines. He's calculating structural weaknesses, directing the placement of evacuating transports, and doing everything possible to minimize casualties. At one point, Tony and Thor combine their powers to overload the machines, driving the city's levitation, a risky maneuver that could destabilize everything. It's Tony's plan to thwart Ultron's meteor-like drop, even if it means blowing the landmass apart before it can fall. The plan works. With Vision's help severing Ultron's control, Tony and Thor unleash a massive energy surge that shatters the landmass. When the dust settles, the immediate threat is over. Ultron is defeated, his final body destroyed by Vision and the combined efforts of the team. But the toll is significant. A city lies in ruins, lives were lost. In the aftermath, Tony is somber. He stands amid the ruined Sokovian cityscape, the weight of accountability pressing on him. There is no doubt that Ultron's carnage started with him. While his friends do not explicitly condemn him, they all shared the burden in stopping Ultron. Tony's own conscience is his harshest judge. Back home, the Avengers team, as Tony knew it, reaches a turning point. Some, like Thor, depart to investigate deeper troubles, hinting at the Infinity Stones. Clint retires to his family, and Steve and Natasha begin training a new roster of Avengers to carry on. Tony, for his part, decides to step away. At the new Avengers facility, Tony quietly tells Steve and Natasha that he needs time. Perhaps he needs to heal the trust that was broken and reflect on the kind of hero he wants to be. He's realized that, in his noble ambition to protect the world, he inadvertently nearly destroyed it, a bitter lesson that tampering with creations beyond one's full understanding can have dire costs. Pepper, who had been absent during the Ultron crisis, welcomes Tony back with understanding. Tony confides in her the guilt he feels, and Pepper, ever grounding, helps Tony see that his drive to save everyone, while admirable, can't always account for every variable, that sometimes even Tony Stark cannot control every outcome. In these gentle moments away from the armor, Tony finds solace and resolves to learn from his mistakes. Thus, Age of Ultron ends with Tony coming full circle. He tried to put a shield around the world and learned that true security cannot be achieved by one man's will alone. As he leaves the Avengers facility in his sleek car, he does so knowing that he may return someday, but only when he's ready and on better terms with the demons that drove him. The sun sets on Tony, looking forward, hopeful that the new Avengers will keep the world safe for now. Tony Stark, ever evolving, carries both the burden and wisdom gained from this chapter, a humbling reminder that his greatest strengths must be tempered with cooperation and trust in others. Captain America: Civil War. In the wake of Ultron's havoc, Tony Stark strives to regain control and accountability. The world governments are increasingly uneasy about the unchecked power of the Avengers, and Tony, more than anyone, understands their concern. He carries the guilt of Sokovia and the responsibility for having created Ultron. This guilt finds a poignant focus when, after a conference talk at MIT, where Tony funds young inventors, he is confronted by a grieving mother in a quiet corridor. She presses a photograph of her son, Charles Spencer, into Tony's hand and tells him that her child died in Sokovia, crushed in a building during the Avengers' battle with Ultron. Her voice trembles with restrained pain as she holds Tony personally responsible. After all, who else created the thing that caused her son's death? Tony is rendered speechless, the photo of the bright young man in his hands feeling as heavy as lead. Later, alone, Tony stares at that picture. Every facet of his demeanor, the droop of his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes, reveals how deeply this encounter strikes him. All of his inner remorse coalesces into a resolve. The Avengers can't continue operating without oversight. They need boundaries, rules, some form of leash to prevent collateral damage and reckless decisions. Thus, when the Sokovia Accords are introduced, a UN proposal to place the Avengers under official regulation, Tony becomes their chief advocate. Gathering in a sleek conference room with views of a grey sky, the Avengers listen as Secretary Ross briefs them on the Accords. A video plays, showing scenes of devastation, New York, Washington, D.C. Sokovia, each clip a reminder of battles fought and lives lost, inadvertently. Tony winces at each, especially Sokovia. He is unusually subdued and serious. When Ross leaves them to discuss, a divide quickly emerges. Steve Rogers raises concerns about freedom and the potential political agendas that might misuse the Avengers. Tony counters with uncharacteristic earnestness, admitting that we need to be put in check. His voice carries the weight of personal responsibility. He mentions the young man's photo and how they have to accept that some of their actions have had dire unintended consequences. Pepper's absence looms over Tony as well. Their relationship is strained partly because of these stresses and Tony's unending calling as Iron Man, and Tony feels he's driven away the person he loves due to his past choices. All of this cements Tony's stance that they must try a different approach, even if it means giving up some autonomy. The team is split. Despite heated debate, ultimately some agree to sign the Accords with Tony. James Rhodes stands with Tony, as do Vision and Natasha Romanoff. Steve Rogers, Sam Wilson and a few others are firmly against signing, valuing freedom over regulation. The ideological rift soon turns into a practical one when an attack at the Accords signing event frames Steve's old friend Bucky Barnes for a bombing that kills King T'Chaka of Wakanda. Steve moves to protect Bucky, acting outside the law, which puts him at odds with Tony's newfound insistence on following authority. Tony, torn between affection for Steve and duty to the law, is tasked with bringing in Rogers and his splinter group who have refused the Accords. Believing still that he's doing the right thing to prevent further conflict, Tony approaches this with a heavy heart. He misses the ease of their friendship, but can't ignore his conscience or the pressure from authorities. In an attempt to minimize actual fighting, Tony tries to reason with Steve, meeting him at a hangar in Germany where Steve's team is trying to get away. But both men are entrenched in their beliefs. The time for talking gives way to action as each side lines up on opposite ends of an airport tarmac, an emotionally charged and heartbreaking confrontation between allies. Tony, ever the futurist, has an ace up his sleeve to level the playing field without escalating to lethal force. Peter Parker, a young Spider-Man whom Tony recently discovered on YouTube stopping petty crimes in Queens. Tony sees something of his younger self in the brilliant, quippy teenager, and more importantly recognizes that Spider-Man's unique powers could help subdue Team Cap without anyone getting seriously hurt. In an earlier heartfelt scene in Peter's apartment, Tony recruited the starstruck kid, giving him a new high-tech suit and guidance. Now, in the airport battle, Spider-Man swings in wide-eyed but eager, temporarily catching even Steve's team off guard with his web-slinging prowess under Tony's mentorship. The battle itself is a cacophony of clashing heroes, one that Tony participates in with reluctance beneath his determined focus. He trades blows with friends he once fought beside, each clash tinged with regret. When his repulsor beam collides with Sam's gauntlets or when he parries a strike from Clint, Tony can't help but recall missions they succeeded in together. Now soured by this conflict, Tony tries to remain measured. He disables vehicles rather than people, and more than once he pleads for Steve to stand down, insisting they can work things out within the system. Despite moments of light-hearted banter, the fight's endgame is painful. To allow Steve and Bucky to escape, some of Steve's allies sacrifice their own freedom. Natasha betrays Tony's side momentarily to let Steve go, and others are captured. The emotional crescendo hits when Rhodes, Tony's closest friend, is accidentally struck by Vision's mis-aimed energy beam. War Machine spirals out of the sky with Tony desperately chasing after, but he can't reach Rhodey in time. Rhodey crashes hard into the ground. A hush falls as Tony lands beside his best friend's motionless body, terrified that he might be dead. When medical scans reveal Rhodey is alive, but with a grievous spinal injury, Tony's face contorts with anguish. His worst fear of collateral damage among his loved ones has been realized. In that moment, any hope Tony had that this conflict could resolve without permanent scars is shattered. Rhodey's paralysis becomes a lasting reminder of how far things have gone wrong. In the aftermath, Tony visits the Raft, a high-security prison, where the captured members of Steve's team are detained. The sight of his friends locked up, glaring at him with a mix of betrayal and heartbreak, weighs heavily on Tony. Clint's bitter words lash at Tony's conscience. Even without saying it, their eyes ask, was this worth it? Tony has no easy answer. He initially came in anger and righteous vindication, but leaves with a heart heavier than before, now fully doubting the path he chose. The final straw comes when evidence emerges that Bucky Barnes was framed. Realizing Steve was right about Bucky's innocence, Tony feels a pang of remorse. He travels to Siberia, where Steve and Bucky have gone pursuing Zemo, hoping to reconcile and help. In the frozen, abandoned Hydra facility, Tony arrives not as an enemy but an ally, even apologizing to Steve with a weary sincerity. For a brief moment, it seems the worst might be behind them. But Zemo has one more cruel truth to unveil. A personal, devastating secret for Tony. Grainy security footage comes to life on an old monitor. It shows the night of December 16, 1991. Tony watches in growing horror as he recognizes the car on the screen, his parents' car, and then sees the Winter Soldier, murder Howard and Maria Stark on a dark road. It's a moment that knocks the wind from Tony's soul. He had never truly known how his parents died. Now the gruesome answer plays out like a twisted home movie. Tony's hands shake and tears rim his eyes, but soon hot rage floods in to replace shock. Steve's face says it all. He knew. Steve admits quietly that he had known Bucky was involved, but spared Tony the knowledge to protect him. To Tony, this feels like the deepest cut of betrayal. The man he considered a friend, almost a brother, kept the truth of his parents' murder from him. Tony's grief and fury override all reason. He turns on Bucky with lethal intent. "He killed my mom," Tony spits, voice cracking between a sob and a snarl, and in that moment, nothing else matters. Tony's Iron Man unleashes its full power against Bucky, and Steve leaps in to defend his friend. What ensues is an emotionally brutal fight. Iron Man versus Captain America and the Winter Soldier, not for ideals or politics now, but for Tony's unchecked need for vengeance and Steve's desperate need to protect the only family he has left. Blow after blow, their conflict crescendos in an icy underground chamber. Tony's rage makes him formidable. He repels Steve and blasts Bucky's metal arm clean off in a shower of sparks. Yet Steve refuses to give up. He won't let Tony kill Bucky even if it costs him everything. The fight ends with Steve slamming his shield into Tony's arc reactor, disabling the Iron Man suit. Tony, beaten and emotionally broken, lies on the ground as Steve helps Bucky to his feet. Steve looks down at Tony, their friendship seemingly irrevocably damaged. In a final act of letting go, Steve drops his shield, the very symbol of his identity, after Tony bitterly tells him he doesn't deserve it. The clang of the shield on concrete echoes Tony's heartbreak. Steve leaves with Bucky, disappearing into the cold, while Tony is left kneeling amid the wreckage, physically dented and, far worse, internally shattered. In the days that follow, the Avengers as Tony knew them are no more. Back home, Tony helps Rhodey begin rehabilitation, fitting him with advanced leg braces. It's one small thing Tony can control and fix, working tirelessly to ensure Rhodey will walk and perhaps even fly again. Their camaraderie remains, albeit laced with shared sadness at what's transpired. Then a letter arrives from Steve Rogers, delivered covertly. In it, Steve expresses deep regret and explains his reasons. Not to justify, but to let Tony know that despite it all, Steve still considers Tony a friend. As Tony reads Steve's sincere words apologizing for hurting him and affirming that if Tony ever needs him, Steve will be there, Tony's hardened expression softens slightly. There's pain, but also perhaps the seed of understanding that both men thought they were doing what was right. Tony provides Steve's letter and a special phone to secure lines, a quiet acknowledgement that if ever a threat arises that they cannot handle apart, Tony might reach out and invoke that promise. Though he doesn't say it aloud, Tony hopes someday bridges can be mended. For now, Tony faces a new reality. He's essentially alone with a much smaller team at his side, operating under government oversight. Pepper re-enters his life during these events. She provides Tony with support and perhaps the gentle insistence that he continue to find purpose beyond the Avengers' breakup. This chapter of Tony's life closes on a somber, contemplative note. Tony has confronted the darkest truths of his past and suffered the fracture of his Avengers family. The man who once was at the center of a team now finds himself more isolated. Yet, even in this low moment, Tony's core remains. He is still Iron Man, determined to protect the world in whatever way he can. And though he might not admit it, he still carries a spark of hope that one day the wounds between him and Steve might heal. For Tony Stark, the Civil War leaves scars both on the outside and within his heart, serving as yet another painful lesson on the cost of being a hero in an imperfect world. Spiderman Homecoming. In the aftermath of the Avengers split, Tony Stark channels some of his energy and hope into mentoring a young hero who reminds him of why he became Iron Man in the first place. That hero is Peter Parker, a bright-eyed teenager from Queens with extraordinary spider-like abilities. Tony discovered Peter while seeking help for the clash with Captain America, and though that conflict ended painfully, Tony saw immense potential in the boy. Sensing that Peter could use guidance, Tony takes the young Spider-Man under his wing in a quiet, semi-official capacity. He provides Peter with an upgraded suit full of advanced features, web shooters, an AI assistant, enhanced webbing options, effectively giving the teen the tools to become a better hero, but also carefully building in training wheels and safeguards to keep the inexperienced Spider-Man safe. Tony's mentorship is at times stern but caring. He communicates with Peter, mostly from afar, letting Happy Hogan act as a liaison, but he keeps close watch on Peter's activities in New York. When Peter, eager to prove himself, gets in over his head, battling Adrian Toomes, a winged criminal dealing in dangerous alien salvage tech, Tony intervenes at critical moments. One night after a harrowing encounter on the Staten Island ferry, where Peter attempts to stop Toomes' weapons sale, disaster strikes, The Vulture's weapon splits the ferry in half, endangering hundreds of passengers. Peter desperately tries to hold the ferry together with his webs, but it's not enough. At the last second, Iron Man drones and Tony himself arrive, stabilizing the ferry's halves and saving everyone from plunging into the sea. The sight of Iron Man hovering amidst the wreckage and towing the ferry back together reassures the panicked crowd, but Tony is not pleased. After the crisis, Tony confronts Peter on the deck, not as a harsh overlord, but as a deeply concerned mentor and almost father figure. His tone is disappointed and worried. "What if someone had died tonight?" Tony asks quietly, looking at the wide-eyed 15-year-old in front of him. Peter, drenched and upset, stammers that he was just trying to be like Tony. Tony's response is gentle but firm. "I wanted you to be better." In that moment, Tony's face reflects how much he genuinely cares for Peter's well-being. This isn't about scolding a subordinate. It's about an adult terrified that a child he's responsible for might get hurt or worse. Deciding that Peter isn't ready for the full weight of heroism without more maturity, Tony does something difficult. He takes back the fancy suit. "If you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it," he tells Peter. Words that echo lessons Tony himself learned years ago when his own suits were taken from him. It's a tough love approach intended to teach Peter that his heroism must come from within, not from technology. Peter is crushed and apologetic, and Tony, seeing the tears well in the boy's eyes, softens for a moment. It's clear the last thing Tony wants is to break Peter's spirit, but he knows this lesson is necessary to keep Peter safe. He leaves Peter with a chance to prove himself through his actions, rather than his gadgets. Over the following days and weeks, Tony remains at a respectful distance, giving Peter space. Unbeknownst to Tony, Peter, even without the Stark suit, continues to pursue the Vulture with his homemade suit, determined to stop the villain and prove his worth. Eventually, Peter does confront and defeat Toomes in a courageous battle on his own, even saving Toomes' life when his equipment explodes. Though Tony isn't present for these events, he is certainly informed afterward, likely through Happy or reports of Spider-Man's heroics. And what Tony learns fills him with pride. The kid he worried about has demonstrated the kind of judgment and heroism that no amount of tech could instill. Recognizing Peter's growth, Tony arranges a meeting under the pretense of one last test. Happy brings Peter upstate to the new Avengers facility. There, Tony greets Peter with a playful grin, standing beside a press room podium. He reveals a brand new Spider-Man suit, even more advanced, the Iron Spider armor, and behind the scenes reporters waiting to meet Spider-Man, ready to announce him as the newest member of the Avengers. It's a culmination of what Tony thinks Peter wants, and perhaps a bit of what Tony himself would have wanted at that age. Recognition and belonging with Earth's mightiest heroes. Tony, wearing a casual nice suit and with pepper pots nearby, invites Peter to step up and accept a place on the team. To Tony's surprise, Peter declines. The teenager, having realized the importance of balancing his normal life and the weight of being a hero, respectfully says he'd rather remain a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man a while longer. Tony's eyebrows lift, and then he smiles. A warm, genuine smile of respect. Despite having dangled what many would consider a dream opportunity, Tony is impressed by Peter's self-awareness and humility. "Good for you," he replies quietly to Peter, seeing that Peter has passed a far more important test, that of character. Tony assures Peter the offer will stand if he changes his mind someday, and as Peter leaves, Tony can't help but feel a bit of fatherly satisfaction. As Peter heads home, Happy remarks that the boy actually turned Tony down. Pepper emerges, wondering what's going on with the gathered press. In a light moment, Tony improvises, turning what was meant to be Spider-Man's introduction into an announcement of something equally meaningful in his personal life. He presents an engagement ring to Pepper that he's been carrying for some time. The press, Not privy to the Spider-Man plan, cheers as Pepper and Tony move forward in their own story, a reminder that Tony Stark's life isn't solely about Iron Man or the Avengers, but also about the human connections he's forged. In mentoring Peter, Tony himself grows. He's come a long way from the man who fought alone. Now he's guiding a new generation, trying to impart hard-earned wisdom. Through this gentle, mentoring role, Tony finds a kind of redemption and continuation of his legacy that doesn't rely on battle or technology, but on nurturing the goodness in someone else. Tony's interactions with Spider-Man are sprinkled with humor, yes, but also with genuine care, a softer chapter in Tony's life that balances the intensity of his other adventures. As Tony watches Peter swing away into the distance back towards Queens, he feels hopeful. The future is in good hands, and Tony Stark, with all his flaws and experience, helped shape it just a little for the better. Avengers Infinity War. By 2018, Tony Stark has achieved a fragile sense of stability in his life. He and Pepper Potts are engaged, and Tony even daydreams about a peaceful future, possibly having a child, as he muses to Pepper about a dream he had of them having a baby named after eccentric relatives. It's a sunny morning in New York, and Tony feels something almost unfamiliar: contentment. The nightmares of past battles have receded slightly, and for once, Tony allows himself to envision a life beyond constant heroics. But destiny has other plans. Tony's quiet moment with Pepper is abruptly interrupted when Dr. Stephen Strange, the master of the mystic arts, appears through a swirling portal alongside Bruce Banner, who has just crash-landed back to Earth with dire news: Thanos is coming. Hearing that name strikes a chord of terror in Tony. This is the looming threat that's haunted his subconscious ever since he flew that nuke through the wormhole in 2012. The invader from Tony's vision, the puppet master behind Loki's invasion, it has all led to this. Tony doesn't hesitate. In an instant, he shifts from dreamy fiancé to armored Avenger. Donning a new nanotech Iron Man suit that spreads over him seamlessly from a device on his chest, Tony heads to the streets alongside Doctor Strange and Bruce. There's no time to gather the fractured Avengers team. Tony must face what comes with whoever is at hand, and what comes is Thanos' brutal vanguard, Ebony Maw and Cull Obsidian. In the streets of Manhattan, outside the Sanctum Sanctorum, Tony stands with Strange, Wong, and Banner as Maw's chilling voice demands the Time Stone from Strange. The battle that erupts is frantic and otherworldly. Tony's suit forms energy blades and cannons as he trades blows with the hulking Obsidian, drawing the giant away from civilians. Amidst quips and quick strategizing, Tony demonstrates how far his technology has come, shaping shields to protect Strange from flying debris, propelling himself with thrusters to tackle Cull Obsidian through the park. But despite their efforts, Ebony Maw, with his telekinetic powers, manages to ensnare Doctor Strange and the Time Stone. Maw's ship, ominous and ring-shaped, looms in the sky and begins to depart with Strange as captive. Determined not to let another friend be taken or another cosmic threat proceed unchecked, Tony pursues Maw's ship. At the last second, he realizes young Peter Parker has also leapt aboard to help, despite Tony's earlier instructions to stay out of such big trouble. Tony can't send the team back now, so he quickly deploys the Iron Spider suit to save Peter from falling and suffocating at high altitude. In doing so, Tony essentially knights Peter as an Avenger, a moment of rushed pride and worry combined. The two stow away together as Maw's vessel leaves Earth's atmosphere. Aboard the spaceship, Tony and Peter stealthily rescue Strange by outwitting Maw, leveraging Peter's penchant for movie references. Tony cannot help a small grin at Peter's excited chatter after the plan works. Even in this dire scenario, The kids' enthusiasm is infectious. With more gone and Strange freed, the trio realize they're on a one-way trip. The ship is heading toward Thanos' homeworld, Titan. Strange suggests using the Time Stone to escape, but Tony, ever the one to confront problems head-on, proposes they take the fight to Thanos directly, hoping for the element of surprise. Tony's voice is calm but resolved. Beneath it lies years of dread now met with the readiness to act. Arriving on Titan, Tony meets members of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Tony now finds himself an impromptu general among a motley crew. The battle-hardened but reckless Peter Quill, the literal-minded Drax, the empathetic Mantis, Strange with his mystic seriousness, and young Peter Parker looking to Tony for guidance. Tony steps up to strategize on the ruined landscape of Titan as strange alien winds howl. Tony uses holograms from his suit to illustrate a plan to ambush Thanos. It's a testament to how far he's come. Tony Stark, once accused of only fighting for himself, now orchestrating a collaborative effort with a team that just met to protect the universe. When Thanos arrives through a portal bearing several Infinity Stones already, Tony feels a chill. It's the purple warlord of his visions come to life. The ensuing battle on Titan is Tony's most desperate fight yet. They throw everything at Thanos: Strange cunning spells, Parker's agile webs, Quill's gadgets, and Drax's brute force. In a heart-stopping moment, they nearly succeed. Through teamwork, they restrain Thanos, and Mantis uses her powers to subdue him mentally. As Tony and Spider-Man struggle to pry off the Infinity Gauntlet from Thanos' hand, Tony's heart pounds with hope. Maybe they can end this here, but the plan goes awry when Quill, maddened by the discovery that Thanos killed Gamora, loses his composure and strikes Thanos, breaking Mantis's hold. Tony yells in frustration as the gauntlet slips from their grasp at the last second, the chance lost. Thanos, enraged, breaks free with a force like an exploding star. What follows is devastation. One by one, Tony's allies are swatted aside or injured. Yet Tony fights on with singular determination. He activates every weapon his bleeding-edge suit contains: massive cannons, restraining nanotendrils, blade arms. In a remarkable sequence, Tony goes one-on-one against Thanos, dancing around the Titan with repulsor bursts and nanoshields forming at will to parry Thanos' blows. It is Iron Man's finest duel, pushing his suit beyond its limits to keep up with the Titan's raw might. Tony even draws a drop of blood from Thanos' grim face with a well-placed strike. But it's not enough. Thanos, momentarily impressed by Tony's tenacity, ultimately overpowers him. With a brutal smash and a surge of energy from the stones, Thanos shatters much of Tony's armor. Tony is battered, helmet gone, face bloodied. In a final thrust, Thanos drives Tony's own broken blade into Tony's abdomen. Tony gasps, a shock of searing pain, and collapses to his knees. For a moment, it feels as if Tony Stark's long journey might end here on alien soil, dying alone far from everyone he loves. Doctor Strange, witnessing this and valuing Tony's importance to the one winning scenario he foresaw, bargains for Tony's life. He surrenders the Time Stone to Thanos to spare Tony. Thanos accepts, withdrawing. And letting Tony live, then departs for Earth to claim the final stone. Tony is left alive but gutted, physically and emotionally. Holding his bleeding side, Tony can barely fathom why Strange gave up the Time Stone, but Strange cryptically assures him it was the only way. Moments later, as Tony and the others reel from defeat, the unthinkable happens. Even from Titan, they can feel it. Thanos completes the Infinity Gauntlet and snaps his fingers. There's a sudden hush across the cosmos. Then, one by one, Tony's new allies begin to disintegrate into ashes before his eyes. First Drax and Mantis, then Peter Quill, each vanishing in bewildered silence. Tony stands, wounded and staggering, horror dawning on him. He's powerless to stop any of it. "Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good." Tony hears Peter Parker's quivering voice and turns to see the young Spider-Man staggering toward him, eyes wide with panic. Tony's heart wrenches. Peter, the brave, bright kid Tony took under his wing, clings to Tony, legs buckling, as he too succumbs to the dust. Tony can only hold on, lowering Peter to the ground as the teenager apologizes, frightened. "Please, I don't want to go," Peter cries, tears in his eyes. Tony's face is a mask of absolute anguish. His worst nightmare is unfolding. He can only choke out, "It's okay, you're okay," lying to comfort the boy in his final moments. Peter dissipates into nothing in Tony's arms. Tony is left kneeling, hands grasping at ashes that were once a child he swore to protect. He hangs his head, the weight of failure unbearable. Nebula, the only other survivor on Titan, quietly states the horrifying truth. Thanos succeeded. Half of all life in the universe is gone. Tony, numb with shock, rises and walks a few paces away. He stares up at the dark sky of Titan, breathing raggedly, eyes red. In this silent moment, Tony Stark, who has always found a way to save the day, is utterly defeated. He couldn't stop Thanos, he couldn't save Peter, and he couldn't prevent the untold losses that are occurring across the stars. In the following hours, Tony and Nebula collect themselves and use what remains of the Guardian's ship to leave Titan. Among the ruins, Tony finds parts to send a message. Weeks later, drifting in the cold void of space, Tony records a farewell message on his cracked helmet, directed to Pepper. He is gaunt, oxygen nearly gone, voice wavering but calm. He says there's a chance he might not make it home, and apologizes in halting words, expressing his love. "Part of the journey is the end," he says softly, as if accepting fate. This scene is one of solitude. Tony alone with his thoughts, ready to die in penance and peace after giving all he could. As Tony falls into a cold sleep, having made peace with his looming end, a bright light appears. Captain Marvel finds the ship and brings it back to Earth. Touching down at Avengers compound, Tony, skeletal and weak, reunites with Steve Rogers for the first time since their bitter fight. But there's no anger now, only grief. Tony, on IV fluids, confronts Steve with raw emotion, lamenting how he needed Steve and how they lost, how his worst fears came true. Too frail to continue, Tony collapses but is caught gently by Steve and others. In a heart-rending whisper, Tony says, "I lost the kid," and those words carry all his heartbreak. Infinity War closes with Tony physically alive, but spiritually crushed. He survived the battle, but at tremendous cost. Friends, allies, and the sense of invincibility that once surrounded the Avengers. Tony bears the pain of knowing he fought with everything he had, and it still wasn't enough. For perhaps the first time, Tony faces a problem he doesn't immediately know how to fix. And yet, even in this darkest hour, a flicker of Tony's spirit remains. The part of him that will not let Peter's death, or any of the losses, be in vain. That ember of determination stays quietly alive within Tony Stark, waiting for its moment in the final chapter to come. Avengers Endgame. Tony Stark has always been defined by his refusal to accept defeat, and in 2019 he faces the greatest challenge of his life, finding a way to undo an almost irreversible loss. The story begins with Tony at his lowest point, rescued from the brink of death in space by Captain Marvel, and returned to Earth. Physically emaciated and emotionally raw, Tony's first reunion with Steve Rogers at the Avengers compound is fraught with pain. He confronts Steve in a trembling voice about how they weren't together when it counted. Tony, feverish and heartbroken, removes his arc reactor and presses it into Steve's hand, a symbolic gesture of both accusation and resignation, before collapsing. Tony then withdraws from the fight, deciding to focus on what remains of his personal life. He and Pepper retreat to a quiet lakeside cabin. In the wake of such cosmic failure, Tony finds solace in the small miracles that survived. Notably, his beloved Pepper, who mercifully was not taken by the snap. Over time, they build a simple, fulfilling life together. In a gentle, joyous development, Pepper and Tony have a daughter, Morgan Stark. Fatherhood softens Tony in unimaginable ways. We see him years later, on a sunny morning outside the cabin, playing with a lively little girl with Pepper's eyes and Tony's wit. Morgan adores her father 3000, and Tony, when he holds her or tucks her in at night, feels a kind of profound love and peace that heroics never gave him. In these 5 years after the snap, Tony finally experiences the normal, happy family life he once fantasized about, a bittersweet gift carved out of universal tragedy. Yet, even as Tony smiles with Morgan or works on sustainable technology by the dock, Pepper notices the faraway look that sometimes clouds his expression. Tony still carries the grief of losing Peter Parker and half the universe. He keeps the old flip phone Steve sent him, tucked away in case of some need, but he hasn't used it. He's tried to accept that some things can't be fixed. Still, the hero in Tony can't fully rest. When Scott Lang reappears with a wild idea about the quantum realm and time travel, hope flickers once more at the Avengers' doorstep. Steve, Natasha, and Bruce approach Tony at his cabin with this implausible plan to retrieve the Infinity Stones from the past and reverse Thanos' snap. Tony is initially resistant. Standing on his porch, arms crossed, he politely but firmly refuses. The thought of risking the life he's built, the wife he cherishes, the daughter he treasures, on what sounds like a desperate long shot is too much. "I can't," Tony says quietly. For once, self-preservation overrides his instinct to dive in. He's done his part. He thinks he saved the world many times, and now others will have to find a solution. That night, however, Tony cannot sleep. After tucking Morgan in, Tony goes to his workshop. There, surrounded by pictures, one notably of himself with Peter Parker smiling wide at a science fair, Tony's restless mind takes over. He begins tinkering with equations for how one might navigate the quantum realm safely. It's as if part of him was solving the puzzle subconsciously all along. In a eureka moment, both triumphant and haunting, Tony cracks the code for time travel, figuring out a stable time-space GPS method. He stands there, stunned at the implications of what glows on his screen. He has in his hands the key to possibly bringing back everyone they lost. Pepper finds Tony on the couch shortly after, eyes red from the emotional weight of this discovery. She listens as Tony confesses that he solved it. He's conflicted. If he does nothing, he keeps their family safe, but lives knowing he could have saved trillions. Pepper, who knows Tony's soul better than anyone, asks him if he can rest, knowing he turned away. Tony already knows the answer. He wouldn't be able to. With Pepper's gentle blessing, Tony makes the choice. He will try to save everyone, even if it might cost him everything. Back at Avengers HQ, when Tony arrives unexpectedly, Steve Rogers' face lights with relief and a touch of contrition. Tony, carrying a resolved calm, wordlessly hands Steve his Captain America shield, a peace offering and restoration of trust. "My father made it for you," Tony says quietly, letting go of past resentment. There's no need for more words. Their shared determination to fix the world mends the rift between them as naturally as sunrise. Tony plunges into the work, leading the team in building a time-travel GPS, constructing a makeshift quantum portal, and assembling what's left of the Avengers for the daring time heist. In planning sessions, Tony's strategic mind is on full display. He speaks quickly, yet methodically about the mechanics of retrieving stones from specific moments in time. But beneath the technicalities, there's a personal layer for Tony. He will be revisiting not just places, but times that shaped him. When the time comes to execute the plan, Tony teams up with Steve Rogers, Scott Lang, and Bruce Banner for the New York 2012 mission. Seeing the events of the first Avengers battle from a new angle is surreal for him. Amid comedic antics, Tony remains mission-focused. Their task to secure the Space Stone goes awry when 2012 Loki escapes with it. Tony's eyes widen in dismay as the cube vanishes. It's a major setback. Thinking on his feet, Tony suggests a bold plan B. Go further back in time to 1970, where he knows both the Space Stone and more PUM particles can be found. Steve agrees, and with a sympathetic glance to their younger comrades, Tony and Steve make the jump to an era long before either of them knew each other. At Camp Lehi in 1970, Tony navigates the military base disguised in a suit and tie, but inside he's swirling with emotions. Fate gifts Tony a rare and unexpected encounter. He crosses paths with his father, Howard Stark, who is about to become a dad. Tony is taken aback. Here stands Howard, younger, anxious about impending fatherhood, completely unaware he's conversing with his future son. Suppressing a whirlwind of feelings, Tony engages Howard in gentle conversation. They discuss fatherhood, legacy, and making tough choices. Howard candidly admits his own fears and hopes for his child, expressing that he already loves him but is worried he won't be a great father. Tony, eyes moist, assures Howard that no amount of money ever bought a second of time, a nugget of wisdom and a subtle thanks for the time he's getting with him now. When Howard shakes Tony's hand and then, in a spontaneous, friendly gesture, hugs him goodbye, Tony embraces him warmly. It's a healing moment Tony never imagined he'd have, an unspoken forgiveness between father and son. Tony leaves with the Space Stone in hand and tears in his eyes, having received closure he didn't know he needed. It's as if the universe allowed Tony to make peace with Howard, freeing him of a burden he carried since youth. Returning to the present with the stones, Tony's resolve is stronger than ever. Reassembling at Avengers HQ, the team mourns losses, but they press on. Tony builds a new Infinity Gauntlet using his nanotech, and there's a debate about who should wield it to undo the snap. Thor, desperate for redemption, volunteers recklessly, but Tony and Steve hold him back. Thor's not in the best shape for this, and using the stones nearly killed even Thanos. Finally, Bruce does it, reasoning he might survive due to his strength. Everyone braces as Hulk snaps his fingers with the new gauntlet, and Tony's instruments indicate it worked. Billions of lives are restored at that instant. They can't celebrate for long, because 2014 Thanos arrives moments later, attacking Avengers HQ and reducing it to rubble. Tony, Pepper, Steve, Thor, and the remaining heroes find themselves in a final sprawling battle against Thanos and his army on the ravaged grounds of the compound. This time, however, the Avengers have reinforcements. Through Doctor Strange's portals, the vanished heroes return. Tony's heart soars when he sees Peter Parker swing into view, alive and well. In the midst of battle, Tony and Peter find each other. Tony rushes to the boy and, overcome with relief, pulls him into a tight hug. Peter, initially surprised, smiles and chatters that after he got all dusty, he must have passed out, and now he's back. Tony can barely speak, holding the kid close with tears of joy in his eyes, a stark contrast to the last time he held Peter, when the boy died in his arms. This hug says everything. Tony has been given a second chance to save his surrogate son, and he will not waste it. The fight is fierce and chaotic. Tony fights alongside Pepper, now suited up as Rescue in her own powered armor, and they move in sync, covering each other's blind spots. He exchanges determined nods with Steve, who wields Mjolnir in a jaw-dropping moment. There's no envy from Tony, only pride and astonishment at his friend's worthiness. Throughout the battle, Tony's eyes are always searching for the gauntlet. The stones are the key, and he knows Thanos will try to seize them again. At one climactic moment, all seems nearly won. Captain Marvel destroys Thanos' ship and overpowers Thanos, but Thanos cunningly manages to get hold of the Iron Gauntlet. He knocks Carol away using the Power Stone, and is on the verge of snapping once more, this time to obliterate all life. Tony sees Doctor Strange across the battlefield. Strange holds up one finger, silently telling Tony this is the one chance in 14 million where they win. Tony's breath catches. He understands what Strange implies. The one way to victory may require the ultimate sacrifice, and it falls to him. Steeling himself, Tony springs toward Thanos in a final gamble. He grapples with the Titan for the gauntlet. Thanos throws him back with ease, and for a moment it looks like Tony failed to stop him. Thanos growls, "I am inevitable," and snaps his fingers, but nothing happens. The Infinity Stones are gone from his gauntlet, plucked away at the last moment. Thanos turns his hand and sees the stones sliding and reforming into place on Tony's nano glove, flowing up Tony's right arm as his suit adapts to hold them. With the stones now channeling unimaginable power through his body, Tony stands awash in a rainbow of searing light that surges through his armor. Pain immediately floods his system. He can feel it, but he locks eyes on Thanos and musters all the strength and resolve left in his mortal frame. Tony Stark, a mere human, looks at the would-be tyrant and with a quiet firmness echoes the words that started his journey. "And I am Iron Man." He snaps his fingers. A blinding white blast emanates from Tony. Thanos and his armies disintegrate to dust, their evil erased, turning the tide in one stroke. The battlefield falls silent except for the whisper of ashes on the wind. The heroes have won, but the victory has cost Tony everything. The power of all 6 stones coursing through a normal man's body is lethal. Tony falls to his knees, the stones tumbling from his charred gauntlet. Half of Tony's armor is burned away, and he slumps against a piece of debris, mortal wounds consuming him. Rhodey is at his side first, tears in his eyes as he gently touches Tony's shoulder, wordless in their brotherly farewell. Peter Parker, not a boy in this moment, but a brave young man, rushes up sobbing, begging Tony to stay. "We won, Mr. Stark. We won." "You did it," he cries, voice cracking. Tony, barely conscious, his gaze distant, has just enough awareness to recognize Peter's voice. If he could speak, he might say how proud he is. Instead, his hand twitches slightly in acknowledgement before Peter is pulled away by Rhodey as Pepper steps in. Pepper kneels in front of Tony, tears glistening in her eyes, but trying to remain strong for him. Tony's unfocused eyes find hers, the love of his life. She places a hand on his cheek, her voice calm and soothing, despite the agony threatening to overtake her. "Hey," she says softly with a trembling smile. "Look at me. We're going to be okay. You can rest now." These words are everything Tony needs to hear. Pepper, choking back tears, assures him that she and Morgan will be all right, that his job is done, and done brilliantly. Tony's arc reactor flickers, the light in it fading. With the last ounce of strength, Tony's eyes convey love and peace. Pepper's face is the last thing he sees as the light leaves his eyes, and his arc reactor dims out. Tony Stark, Iron Man, The man who was never one to lay down his life easily has given that life freely to save the universe. He is gone. The aftermath is heartbreakingly quiet. The heroes gather, many openly weeping. Thor bows his head in respect. Peter clings to Happy Hogan, sobbing. Steve looks utterly grief-stricken, saluting his fallen friend in his own way. Pepper, though tears stream down her face, holds it together enough to close Tony's eyes and kiss his cheek one final time. Tony Stark's funeral is held at the lake house he loved. A simple wreath bearing his first arc reactor, the one Pepper once had engraved with proof that Tony Stark has a heart, is set afloat on the water. Family, friends, allies, everyone impacted by Tony's life stand together to honor him. From older figures like Nick Fury to young Harley to the Avengers new and old, all pay their respects, illustrating just how far Tony's influence reached and how many lives he touched. In the days that follow, Pepper finds a final message Tony recorded on his helmet scanner before the time travel mission. In it, a hologram of Tony appears in their living room, speaking with his trademark warmth and a touch of humor. He addresses his loved ones in case he didn't make it back. He says his farewell not with regret, but with hope and love. Turning toward little Morgan, Tony crouches in the projection and tells her he loves her 3000, delivering the line with a tender smile that causes every adult in the room to quietly break down anew. Tony Stark's story comes to a close not on a note of defeat, but of triumph and legacy. He started as a selfish genius seeking purpose and ended as the selfless savior of the universe. He leaves behind a world restored, a family that will carry his memory, and a new generation of heroes inspired by his journey. In a quiet epilogue, we might imagine Pepper watching Morgan play in the yard, the proof of Tony's heart hanging in their home. Morgan is too young to fully understand her father's heroism, but someday she will, and she will know, as will everyone, that Tony Stark's heart, which once needed an arc reactor to keep beating, shone brightest when he gave that heart for others. Tony has earned his rest, and his legacy of love and heroism will live on for generations to come.